The stars had never seemed so cold as they did on the night humanity first learned its place in the universe. 300 years before this story begins, the exploration vessel Prometheus pushed beyond the edges of the solar system and discovered something that changed everything. They found intelligent life, not simple bacteria or floating microbes, but thinking beings who had built great empires across the galaxy, while humans were still learning to grow crops and build simple villages. The Galactic Concord was the name of the alliance that ruled the stars. 12 ancient races had formed this mighty organization thousands of years before the first human being ever existed. They had conquered sickness and extended their lives for centuries. They had bent the laws of nature to serve their wishes. They had spread across 10,000 worlds and claimed ownership of everything they touched. When humans arrived on the galactic stage, the conquered welcomed them with smiles that hid cruel laughter. The elder races looked at these small, soft creatures who lived barely 100 years and decided they were not worth taking seriously. Ambassador Elena Vasquez had served humanity in the conquered assembly for 30 long years. She remembered her first day in the magnificent chamber where representatives of 12 civilizations gathered to make decisions that shaped the fate of billions. She had been young and full of hope. She had prepared beautiful speeches about friendship and working together. Nobody had cared to listen. The HFY delegate was a massive creature who stood twice as tall as any human. He had 4 powerful arms and scales that changed color like oil floating on water. When Elena tried to introduce herself, he glanced at her briefly and turned away without saying a single word. The Thessian representative belonged to a species that looked like elegant birds with feathers made of pure silver. She had laughed softly when Elena attempted to address the assembly, as if watching a pet try to speak. The other delegates had simply pretended Elena did not exist. They continued their important discussions while she stood alone, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her entire life. "They are primitive creatures," the Archon of the HFY had announced during that first assembly meeting. "Their lives are short and their minds are limited. We shall permit them to observe our proceedings as a kindness, but nothing more than that." Elena had forced herself to smile. She had nodded her head as if grateful for being allowed to witness their greatness. She had walked to the back of the enormous chamber and taken her seat in a small chair designed for observers who held no power and deserved no respect. That was how it began. Over the following 30 years, Elena watched and documented everything that happened to her people. She saw the HFY Empire claim 7 human colony worlds as their own property. They called these planets resource territories and gave the human settlers a simple choice: leave with nothing but the clothes on your backs, or stay and work as servants under HFY masters. Most colonists chose to leave. They abandoned homes they had spent years building and farms they had planted with their own hands. They left behind everything they owned and fled into space with nothing. Those who chose to stay were never heard from again. Elena filed requests asking about their fate. The HFY never bothered to respond. She also documented the activities of the Thessian hegemony. The Thessians considered themselves the greatest scientists in the galaxy. They were especially fascinated by human brains, which they found strange and interesting. Thessian research vessels would appear near human settlements without any warning. They would take people, sometimes dozens at a time, for what they called cognitive studies. Elena received reports from the few survivors who were eventually returned. They came back with pieces of their minds missing. Some could not remember their own names. Others failed to recognize their own children. Many could not speak or walk or feed themselves. Elena filed formal complaints about these kidnappings. She used respectful language and followed every proper procedure. She requested investigations and hearings and justice. The response was always the same. "Scientific research falls under protected activities," the conquered officials told her. "The Thessians have done nothing wrong." Over 30 years, Alina filed 2,847 official grievances. Each one documented a specific crime committed against human beings. Each one followed the correct format and used polite, diplomatic language. Each one asked for peaceful solutions to terrible problems. Every single grievance was rejected. The conquered cannot involve itself in minor territorial disputes, they said when she reported stolen colonies. Humanity must learn to handle its own internal conflicts, they announced when human merchant ships were attacked and their crews sold into slavery. Perhaps if humans were more careful, these unfortunate incidents would not occur, they suggested when entire settlements were destroyed. Alina kept smiling through all of it. She kept nodding politely. She kept attending assembly meetings where nobody acknowledged her presence. She kept filing her reports and following procedures that accomplished nothing. But she also kept records of her own. In her private quarters aboard the human diplomatic station, Alina maintained a secret file she named the Ledger. Every crime against humanity went into this file. Every insult and every atrocity was carefully recorded. She gathered names and dates and locations. She collected testimony from survivors and evidence from crime scenes. She built a mountain of documentation that grew taller with each passing year. Her superiors on Earth knew about the ledger. They encouraged her to keep adding to it. Be patient, they told her during their secret communications. Document everything. The time will come when all of this information will be needed. Alina did not fully understand what they meant. She did not know what plans humanity was making in secret, but she trusted her leaders. She believed that her suffering served a purpose, even if she could not see that purpose yet. Meanwhile, the elder races became bolder in their cruelty. At one assembly meeting, the HFY Archon proposed limiting human ships to a tiny region of space. He argued that humanity was not mature enough to travel freely among the stars. They multiply like insects, the Archon declared, his voice filled with disgust. If we do not contain them now, they will spread everywhere and contaminate the galaxy with their presence. The proposal passed without a single vote against it. Every delegate from every elder race agreed that humans should be caged like animals. Alina sat in her observer's chair and wrote down every word spoken that day. She noted which delegates laughed at the Archon's insults. She recorded which ones nodded in agreement with his hateful speech. She added everything to the ledger. At another meeting, a Thessian scientist presented research findings to the assembly. The presentation included images of human test subjects who had been cut open while they were still alive and conscious. The scientist described their screaming as an interesting pattern of sounds and wondered whether humans experienced pain the same way real species did. The assembly had applauded this presentation. Delegates had congratulated the scientist on her important work. Alina had clapped along with everyone else. She had smiled her diplomatic smile. Later that night, alone in her quarters, she had wept until no more tears would come. Then she had dried her eyes and added the presentation to the ledger. Young members of the human diplomatic team often asked Alina how she survived. How could she sit there day after day, absorbing insults and cruelties, and never once fight back? Fighting is not my assignment, Alina would explain. My assignment is to watch and remember and record. When the time comes for fighting, others will handle that responsibility. They thought she was broken. They believed decades of abuse had destroyed her spirit until nothing remained but empty obedience. They could not have been more wrong. Alina Vasquez was not broken. She was not defeated. She was waiting. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, in places the elder races never thought to examine, humanity was waiting with her. Humanity was building. Humanity was preparing. The conquered saw a species of weak, short-lived creatures who smiled at insults and responded to violence with paperwork. They saw animals that could be hunted without consequence. They never wondered why those animals kept smiling. They never asked what humanity might be planning during all those quiet years. They never imagined that patience could be a weapon. But patience was exactly that, and humanity had been sharpening that weapon for 300 years. The galaxy would soon discover what happened when humanity decided the time for patience had ended. That day was coming closer with every atrocity the elder races committed. They just did not know it yet. Captain Marcus Chen stood on the command deck of the UEN Steadfast and stared at the empty darkness where a human freighter had been floating just 6 hours earlier. The Krethvi raiders had struck again. They had appeared from nowhere, disabled the merchant vessel with a single shot, and stripped it of everything valuable. Then they had taken the crew of 47 men and women and vanished back into the darkness of space. By the time the Steadfast arrived at the location, nothing remained except scattered debris and a fatting distress signal that nobody would ever answer. "Did anyone survive?" Marcus asked his sensor officer, even though he already knew what the answer would be. "No survivors detected, Captain. The escape pods were launched, but they are all empty. The raiders took everyone aboard." Marcus let out a long, tired breath. This was the 12th attack on human ships this month alone. 12 vessels lost, more than 500 human beings stolen and carried away to unknown destinations where unknown horrors awaited them. He had sent 17 requests for assistance to the Galactic Concord. 17 carefully written messages asking for protection, for patrols, for any kind of help at all. The reply was always identical. The Conquered cannot intervene in minor territorial disputes. Humanity must learn to defend its own merchant vessels. Minor territorial disputes. That was what they called the organized hunting of human ships. That was how they dismissed the kidnapping and enslavement of human citizens. Marcus walked back to his captain's chair and pulled up the latest reports. Human patrol ships were stretched impossibly thin across the outer reach. They had barely 100 small frigates trying to protect thousands of merchant vessels crossing millions of kilometers of hostile space. It was never enough. It would never be enough. But complaining accomplished nothing. Marcus had learned that painful lesson many years ago. All he could do was keep trying, keep patrolling, keep hoping that somehow things would change. He was preparing to order a return course to the nearest supply station when his communications officer suddenly jumped up from her seat. "Captain, we are receiving a priority emergency signal. It is coming from the colony ship New Haven." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. The New Haven was one of the largest colony transports in the human fleet. It carried 12,000 civilian passengers fleeing the failed settlement on Kepler-22. The life support systems on that colony had broken down beyond repair, forcing everyone to evacuate. 12,000 innocent people, and 3,000 of those passengers were children. "What is their situation?" Marcus demanded. "A Thessian science vessel has intercepted them, Captain. The Thessians are demanding that the New Haven surrender all passengers for cognitive research." The officer paused, her face turning pale. "They are firing warning shots. The New Haven has no weapons to defend itself." "Change course immediately. Maximum engine power. Push beyond safety limits if necessary." The Steadfast jumped into faster-than-light travel, straining its engines to dangerous levels. Marcus stood at the front of the bridge, watching stars blur past the viewports, silently begging his ship to go faster. They were 4 hours away at maximum speed. 4 hours of helpless traveling while 12,000 defenseless people faced their worst nightmare. "Should we contact the Conquered for emergency assistance?" one of his younger officers suggested. Marcus almost laughed at the idea. The Conquered considers Thessian research to be a protected activity. They have made that very clear. They would refuse to help even if they could arrive in time. Silence fell over the bridge. Everyone knew he spoke the truth. For 4 terrible hours, the crew of the Steadfast could do nothing but wait. They received updates from the new haven, and each message was worse than the one before. The Thessians had forced their way aboard. They were separating families, pulling children away from screaming parents. They were marching people onto their research vessel in groups of 50. The messages described scenes of terror and chaos, passengers begging for mercy, children crying for their mothers, Thessian soldiers ignoring all pleas as they methodically processed their human cargo. Then the messages stopped completely. When the Steadfast finally reached the coordinates, Marcus found the new haven drifting silently through space. No lights glowed in its windows. No signals came from its communication systems. The great ship hung dark and cold against the stars like a tomb. "Any life readings?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "None, Captain. The ship appears to be completely without life." Marcus assembled a boarding team and led it personally. He needed to see what had happened with his own eyes. He needed to bear witness. The corridors of the new haven were empty and silent as death. Personal belongings lay scattered everywhere, dropped by people who had no time to hold onto possessions. Family photographs and children's toys and half-eaten meals covered the floors. Little pieces of 12,000 interrupted lives. They discovered the first bodies in the medical bay. The Thessians had converted the new haven's own medical facilities into a research laboratory. Human beings lay on operating tables with their skulls cut open and their brains partially removed. Medical instruments still protruded from wounds that had never been closed. The expressions frozen on the victims' faces made clear that many had been fully awake and aware during the procedures. They had felt everything. They had experienced every moment of what was done to them. Marcus forced himself to continue moving. He activated his recording equipment and documented everything he saw, every body, every wound, every terrible detail. In the main cargo bay, they found the children. Marcus Chen had served as a soldier for more than 20 years. He had witnessed combat and bloodshed and death. He thought nothing could shock him anymore. He was wrong. The Thessians had been particularly interested in studying young human brains. They wanted to understand how human intelligence developed during childhood. They had collected samples from over 3,000 young test subjects. None of those subjects had survived the collection process. One of Marcus's officers collapsed to his knees and was sick. Another turned away and began sobbing uncontrollably. Even the most experienced soldiers in the boarding party could not maintain their composure. Marcus stood frozen in place. He could not move. He could not think. He could only stare at the horror surrounding him. He did not know how much time passed before he recovered enough to activate his communicator. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, his voice sounding hollow and distant even to his own ears. "I am transmitting my recordings to you now. Please add them to the ledger." A long silence followed before Elena responded. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of similar reports. "Received, Captain. I am adding it to the file." "How many more?" Marcus asked. "How many more times do we document their crimes while doing nothing to stop them?" "I do not know the answer," Elena admitted, "but I intend to find out tonight. There is an important call I need to make." The connection ended. Marcus ordered his crew to begin the heartbreaking work of recovering the bodies. Every single victim deserved to be returned to whatever family might still be waiting for them. Every single name deserved to be remembered. As he supervised the grim work, Marcus made a silent vow. This atrocity would not be forgotten. This crime would not go unpunished. Someday, the Thessians and the Krethvi and all the elder races who had laughed at human suffering would discover the price of their cruelty. He could not know that the day of reckoning was much closer than he dared to hope. That night, in her quarters far across the galaxy, Ambassador Elena Vasquez reviewed the ledger one final time. 140,000 documented crimes stretched across 300 years of history. Raids and kidnappings and murders and experiments. A complete record of everything the galaxy had done to humanity. She opened a secure, encrypted channel to United Earth Command. "How long have our forces been prepared?" she asked. The reply came from Admiral Yuki Tanaka, commander of military assets that Elena had never been officially told existed. 60 years, Ambassador. We have been building ships and training soldiers and developing weapons for 60 years. Everything is ready. Everyone is ready. We have only been waiting for authorization to begin. Elena closed her eyes and thought of the cargo bay filled with dead children. She thought of all the colonists dragged from their homes. She thought of every forced smile she had worn while monsters laughed in her face. "Authorization is granted," she said firmly. "Tell everyone to prepare for immediate action. Patience is no longer something we can afford." "Understood, Ambassador. Operation Long Memory is now officially active. The galaxy will learn what happens when humanity stops asking nicely." Elena ended the transmission and looked out at the cold, distant stars. Somewhere out there, the elder races were sleeping peacefully in their comfortable beds. They felt completely safe in their assumed superiority. They had no idea what was about to happen. They had pushed humanity beyond the breaking point. They had confused silence with helplessness and patience with cowardice. They were about to learn just how terribly wrong they had been. The quiet species had finally found its voice. And when that voice spoke, the entire galaxy would hear it. The Galactic Concord Assembly Hall had never appeared more magnificent than it did on the morning of the millennial celebration. 1,000 years had passed since the 12 elder races created their great alliance. 1,000 years of what they proudly called peace and progress. 1,000 years of galactic civilization spreading its influence across countless star systems. Delegates from every member species filled the enormous circular chamber. The HFY contingent occupied their traditional section, their multicolored scales polished until they gleamed like precious gems. The Thessians perched on their elevated platforms, silver feathers arranged in elaborate patterns that communicated status and authority. Representatives of 10 other ancient civilizations sat in their assigned positions, each species proud of its role in maintaining galactic order. And at the very back of the chamber, in the small, uncomfortable chair reserved for species who did not matter, sat Ambassador Elena Vasquez of United Earth. She had dressed with special care for this particular occasion. Her diplomatic uniform was perfectly pressed and spotlessly clean. Her gray hair was arranged in a simple, dignified style. She looked exactly as she had looked for the past 30 years, patient, quiet, and easy to ignore. But something was different about her today. Something had changed behind her calm expression. The Archon of the HFY rose from his seat to deliver the opening speech. He was an impressive figure, towering over representatives of most other species. His 4 muscular arms spread wide in a dramatic gesture of welcome. "Fellow members of our glorious Concord," he began, his deep voice echoing through the vast hall. "We have gathered here today to celebrate 1,000 years of peace and prosperity. Under the wise guidance of our alliance, the galaxy has flourished beyond all expectation. Order has been established across 10,000 worlds. Lesser species have been brought into the light of proper civilization." He paused to accept the applause that rippled through the chamber. "I wish to specifically acknowledge our recent productive expansion into the Outer Reach territories. New resource zones have been secured for the benefit of all Concord members. New populations have been brought under appropriate management. The future of our great alliance has never looked more promising." Elena listened as the Archon described the theft of human colony worlds as productive expansion. She heard him refer to enslaved human beings as populations under appropriate management. She watched delegates from a dozen species nod and smile in approval of these carefully chosen words. And then she rose to her feet. The entire chamber fell instantly silent. Observers were not permitted to stand during official proceedings. Observers were not allowed to interrupt addresses. In 1,000 years of conquered history, no observer had ever dared to break these sacred rules. The Archon stared at Alina with a mixture of surprise and growing anger. What is the meaning of this outrageous behavior? Return to your seat immediately. I invoke the right of testimony, Alina announced. Her voice was clear and steady, carrying easily across the silent hall. This right is granted under Article 7 of the original Concord Charter to any species that wishes to present a formal grievance against a member state. Confused murmurs spread through the assembly. The right of testimony was ancient history, a relic from the earliest days of the Concord. It had been included centuries ago to make primitive newcomers feel important and included. Nobody had actually used it in over 800 years. The Thessian delegate leaned forward, her silver feathers fluttering with irritation. That provision is purely ceremonial. It has no real meaning in modern proceedings. Perhaps you are correct, Alina replied calmly. However, the right has never been officially removed from the charter. It still exists in the legal code, and I am invoking it right now, as is my privilege. The delegates exchanged uncertain glances. What should they do? This human was disrupting their important celebration, but she was technically following proper legal procedure. Finally, the Thessian waved one dismissive wing. Very well, present your testimony if you must. You have exactly 1 hour to speak, though I cannot possibly imagine what grievance your insignificant species could raise that would concern this distinguished assembly. Alina smiled, but it was not the diplomatic smile she had practiced for 3 decades. This smile was something entirely different. This smile belonged to a woman who had waited a very long time for exactly this moment. I will not require an hour, she said. In fact, I will need very little time. But before I begin my testimony, I would like to share something important with everyone present in this chamber. She touched a control on her personal communicator. Instantly, every display screen in the assembly hall flickered and changed. The proud Concord emblem vanished, replaced by something the delegates had never seen before. The ledger appeared on every screen in the chamber. 140,000 documented atrocities began scrolling past. Names and dates and locations filled the displays. Images and recordings and survivor testimonies appeared one after another. 300 years of crimes against humanity were suddenly visible for all to witness. What is this material? The Archon demanded. His scales had shifted to an angry red color. This is everything, Alina replied. Every raid conducted against human merchant vessels, every colony stolen from human settlers, every citizen kidnapped for Thessian experiments, every child murdered in the name of scientific research. She paused, allowing the images to continue scrolling across the screens. For 300 years, humanity has petitioned the conquered for justice. We have filed grievances through every proper channel. We have requested hearings and investigations. We have followed every procedure designed for peaceful resolution of disputes. Her voice grew harder with each word. And what did we receive in response? Dismissal, contempt, mockery. You called us primitive and weak. You stole our worlds and kidnapped our people and murdered our children. And when we complained, you told us to be grateful that you permitted us to exist at all. The chamber had become completely silent. Every delegate stared at the screens showing evidence of crimes they had thought would never be exposed. Some looked angry, others appeared uncomfortable. A few seemed genuinely ashamed of what they were witnessing. We asked for mercy, Alina continued. We begged to be treated as equals. We requested, again and again, that you simply recognize us as beings worthy of basic respect. She shook her head slowly. You refused every request. You ignored every appeal, and so we have stopped asking. The Archon had regained some of his composure. He drew himself up to his full impressive height. This theatrical display is meaningless. What do you expect to accomplish here? Do you believe that showing us images will somehow change anything? You have no power in this chamber. You have no military forces. You have nothing but words. Elena looked at him with an expression that almost resembled pity. You truly believe that, do you not? You have spent 300 years watching us file paperwork and attend meetings and smile at your insults. You convinced yourselves that we were harmless. You decided that our patience meant we were simply incapable of defending ourselves. She touched another control on her communicator. Allow me to correct that serious misunderstanding. Across the entire galaxy, in positions the conquered had never thought to monitor, in locations the elder races had never imagined anyone would hide, something began to move. Warning alarms started sounding throughout the assembly hall. Delegates reached frantically for their own communication devices, receiving urgent reports from their homeworlds and military bases. What is happening? The Thessian delegate shrieked. Her carefully arranged feathers were now in complete disarray. Elena's smile grew wider. While humanity was smiling politely and filing our useless grievances, we were also building. We studied your technology and learned to improve upon it. We constructed hidden shipyards in asteroid fields and inside hollowed-out moons. We trained soldiers and scientists and engineers. We developed weapons you cannot imagine. We prepared for the day when patience would no longer be possible. She looked around the chamber, meeting the frightened eyes of every delegate. That day has arrived. You are attempting to deceive us, the Archon growled. Humanity does not possess the capability to threaten the conquered. 2 hours ago I would have agreed with your assessment, Elena admitted. But 2 hours ago I transmitted the authorization to begin Operation Long Memory. At this very moment, human vessels are emerging from concealed positions throughout conquered territory. Your fleets are being surrounded. Your stations are being watched. Your homeworlds are under observation. She let that information sink into their minds. We have never wanted war. We still do not want war. But we are finished dying quietly while you debate whether we deserve to live. The assembly hall erupted into complete chaos. Delegates shouted at each other and at Elena. Security guards moved toward her position. Elena remained perfectly calm. She had spent 30 years preparing for this moment. She would not allow panic to ruin it now. You face a choice, she announced. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. You can listen to what humanity has to say. You can review the evidence of your crimes and discuss appropriate consequences. You can work with us to create a galaxy where every species is treated with basic dignity. She paused for one heartbeat. Or you can choose to fight, and you can discover exactly how much we have been preparing during our 300 years of patient, silent waiting. The chamber fell quiet again. The delegates looked at each other with expressions of uncertainty and growing fear. They had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years. They had never once imagined that anyone could challenge their absolute power. And now, a single human woman was doing exactly that. Elena Vasquez had finally stopped smiling her diplomatic smile. And the galaxy would never be the same again. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on the command bridge of the flagship Remember New Haven and watched the HFY home fleet slowly realize that it was completely surrounded. 60 human warships had emerged from carefully concealed positions around the HFY homeworld. These were not the clumsy transport ships and tiny patrol frigates that the elder races had learned to dismiss with contempt. These vessels were something entirely new, something the galaxy had never witnessed before. The ships were sleek and powerful, designed by engineers who had spent 6 decades studying captured alien technology and finding ways to improve upon it. Their hulls were covered in materials that absorbed sensor signals. Their engines produced almost no detectable emissions. They could move through space like ghosts, invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. And the HFY were only beginning to comprehend how badly they had underestimated the species they called primitive. "Admiral, the enemy fleet is attempting to activate their weapons systems," the tactical officer reported from his station. "Let them try," Yuki responded calmly. "Activate the suppression field at full power." The Remember New Haven broadcast a specialized signal that spread across the entire HFY military formation. The signal was the result of decades of research, designed to exploit weaknesses in conquered technology that the elder races had never bothered to fix. One by one, the massive HFY warships went dark. Weapons that had been charging suddenly lost power. Engines that had been preparing to maneuver fell silent. Defensive shields that should have protected the ships flickered and collapsed. The mighty HFY fleet hung motionless in space, completely helpless. Every vessel was disabled but undamaged. Every crew was alive but unable to do anything except wait. "Suppression field has achieved complete effectiveness," the tactical officer announced. "All enemy vessels are neutralized. 0 casualties reported on either side." "Excellent work," Yuki said with satisfaction. "Open a communication channel to their command vessel." A moment later, the face of the HFY fleet commander appeared on the main display screen. He was enormous, even larger than the Archon, with scales that had turned pale gray from shock. "What have you done to us?" he demanded. "What is this impossible weapon? How can this be happening?" Yuki studied the commander for a long moment before responding. This was the fleet that had terrorized human shipping lanes for generations. These were the ships that had raided human colonies and enslaved human citizens while laughing at human weakness. And now the entire fleet was as helpless as a newborn infant. "For 60 years, humanity has been carefully studying your technology," she explained in a patient tone. "We captured damaged vessels from your raids and took them apart piece by piece. We analyzed every component. We found your systems rather simple and predictable, actually." She allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. "Your power systems rely on crystalline energy matrices that are extremely vulnerable to specific harmonic frequencies. Your weapons require neural interface connections that can be disrupted by targeted electromagnetic pulses. Your defensive shields are impressive but follow patterns that are easy to predict once you understand the underlying mathematics." The commander's scales flushed with angry color. "You studied us. You analyzed our technology. That is impossible. You are primitives. You lack the intelligence for such work." "That is what you believed," Yuki agreed. "You never considered upgrading your defenses because you never imagined anyone would figure out how to defeat them. Why would you worry? No other conquered species would dare to challenge you, and humans were too backward and stupid to pose any threat." She leaned forward slightly. "You were wrong about us, very, very wrong." The commander struggled to maintain his composure. "This is an act of war against the entire conquered. You will be annihilated for this aggression. Every human world will be reduced to ashes." "The conquered is rather occupied at the moment," Yuki replied. "You see, your fleet is not the only military force receiving unexpected visitors today." Across the vast expanse of conquered territory, similar scenes were unfolding simultaneously. The Theshan science stations that had conducted so many horrific experiments on human subjects suddenly found themselves surrounded by human warships. Each ship broadcast the same simple message on repeat: "Release all human prisoners immediately. You have exactly 1 hour to comply with this demand." The primary conquered military headquarters discovered that human vessels had been hiding in the nearby asteroid field for months. Now those ships were emerging from concealment, their weapons pointed at every strategic target on the base. Colony worlds that had been stolen from humanity watched as human transport ships descended from orbit. But these ships came not to attack or destroy. They came to evacuate every human being who wished to leave, to rescue people who had lived under occupation for years or even decades. In the Galactic Concord Assembly Hall, delegates received frantic reports from every corner of their territories. Human ships were appearing everywhere. The humans possessed technology that no one had known existed. The humans had weapons that could disable entire fleets without causing a single death. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before the panicking delegates, calm and composed, while chaos erupted all around her. "This cannot be real," the Thessian delegate stammered. Her silver feathers were trembling violently. "You are a primitive species. You cannot possibly have developed such advanced technology." "You keep using that word," Elena observed thoughtfully. "Primitive. Tell me, what truly makes a species primitive? It is not their level of technology. It is their refusal to learn and grow and adapt. It is their belief that power gives them the right to abuse those who are weaker." She gestured toward the screens showing human vessels positioned throughout conquered space. "While you were busy congratulating yourselves on your natural superiority, humanity was learning. Every ship you captured from us, we eventually captured from you and studied. Every weapon you used against our people, we analyzed and improved. Every piece of technology you proudly displayed, we examined and made better." The Archon had partially recovered from his initial shock. His scales had stopped their frightened trembling, and his voice was almost steady when he spoke. "Very well, you have demonstrated your point. You possess weapons and ships that we did not expect, but you cannot possibly defeat the combined military forces of 12 species. Even if you achieve victory in this initial engagement, reinforcements will arrive. You will ultimately be destroyed." Elena shook her head with what might have been sadness. "You still fail to understand. We did not come here to destroy you. We did not come seeking revenge. We came here to deliver a message that you have refused to hear for 300 years. She activated a communication channel that broadcast to every inhabited world in conquered space. "People of the Galactic Concord, my name is Ambassador Elena Vasquez, and I speak for United Earth. For 300 years, humanity has suffered in silence while others abused us. Today, that long silence finally ends, but we do not wish to end it with death and destruction." She paused to let her words reach across the light years. "Look at your fleets. Examine your military stations. We possess the power to destroy them completely, but we have not fired a single offensive weapon. We have not taken a single life. Our technology was specifically designed to disable hostile forces without killing anyone." Images appeared on screens throughout the galaxy, showing human vessels holding their fire while conquered warships drifted helplessly. "This is who humanity truly is. This is what we believe. We do not want to rule over you. We do not want to conquer your worlds. We want only what we have always wanted, to be treated as equals, to live in peace, to raise our children without fear that someone will steal them away in the night." Her voice hardened with controlled anger. "But make no mistake about our resolve. Our mercy has definite limits. Push us again and we will push back harder. Hurt our people again and there will be severe consequences. Dismiss us again and discover what happens when a species with nothing left to lose decides it has nothing left to wait for." In the assembly hall, the delegates sat in stunned, terrified silence. On the bridge of the HFY command ship, the fleet commander stared at his useless weapons and wondered how his entire understanding of the universe had proven so completely wrong. Across 1,000 different worlds, citizens of 12 ancient civilizations watched the broadcasts and understood that the galaxy they had known no longer existed. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on her bridge and permitted herself one moment of deep satisfaction. After centuries of patient suffering, humanity had finally stood up and demanded to be recognized. But the work was far from complete. They had demonstrated what humanity could do. Now they needed to show the galaxy who humanity truly was. "Transmit new orders to all human vessels," she commanded. "Maintain current positions but continue to hold fire. We came here to deliver a message, not to commit mass murder. Let the galaxy see that we meant every word we spoke about mercy." The communications officer acknowledged the order and transmitted it across the fleet. Yuki turned to look out at the stars, thinking of all the people who had suffered and waited and hoped for this day to arrive. "This moment is for all of you," she whispered quietly. "For every victim, for every survivor, for everyone who refused to stop believing that things could change." The reckoning that humanity had prepared for so long had finally arrived. And humanity was only getting started. The war that everyone had feared would destroy the galaxy lasted only 9 days. 9 days of tension and uncertainty stretched across countless star systems. 9 days of human warships holding position around conquered worlds, while diplomats argued desperately about what the future would hold. 9 days during which the entire galaxy held its breath, waiting to discover whether civilization would survive or crumble into ashes. In the end, survival won. But the peace that emerged was very different from anything the galaxy had known before. On the 10th day, representatives of all 12 conquered species gathered once again in the assembly hall. They came not to celebrate their power, but to hear the terms that humanity intended to impose. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the central podium, occupying the position where only full members of the conquered had ever been permitted to stand. "I will now present our conditions," she announced to the assembled delegates. "These terms are final and will not be negotiated." The delegates shifted nervously in their seats but remained silent. They had witnessed what human vessels could accomplish. They understood they had no position from which to argue. First, the HFY Empire will return every human being taken during raids over the past 300 years. Those individuals who cannot be returned because they died in captivity will be honored with formal public apologies delivered to their surviving families. Financial compensation will be provided for every life that was lost, every year of freedom that was stolen, every family that was torn apart. The HFY Archon opened his mouth as if to protest these demands, then closed it again without speaking. What argument could he possibly make? The evidence compiled in the ledger was comprehensive and undeniable. Second, the Thessian hegemony will immediately release all human subjects currently held in research facilities. Medical teams will be provided to assist survivors in recovering from their traumatic experiences. All Thessian research conducted on unwilling subjects will cease permanently. Human observers will be assigned to Thessian institutions to ensure complete compliance with this requirement. The Thessian delegate's silver feathers pressed flat against her body in obvious distress, but she nodded her acceptance. She understood that resistance was no longer an option. Third, every human colony world currently under conquered occupation will be returned to human governance without delay. Colonists who were forced to flee their homes will be given the choice to return. Those who suffered under occupation will receive assistance in rebuilding their lives and communities. Elena paused briefly to allow these demands to be fully absorbed. Fourth, humanity will be granted complete and permanent membership in the Galactic Concord, with full voting rights equal to any other species. There will be no more observer status. There will be no more being ignored and dismissed. When decisions are made that affect human beings, human voices will be heard and respected. The delegates exchanged uncomfortable glances. Full membership had never been granted to any species so rapidly, but no species had ever surrounded the conquered with a fleet of previously unknown warships either. Finally, and most importantly, the crimes documented in the ledger will be acknowledged publicly before the entire galaxy. Every species will know what was done to humanity during these 3 centuries. Future generations will learn from these terrible events so that nothing similar ever happens again. Alina stopped speaking and surveyed the assembly with calm, steady eyes. These are the terms humanity offers. Accept them, and our forces will withdraw peacefully. We will work alongside you to build a better galaxy for everyone. We will share our technological advances and our scientific knowledge. We will become genuine partners instead of victims. She allowed the silence to stretch for several heartbeats. Refuse these terms and discover what exists beyond the restraint we have demonstrated today. The military capability you have witnessed represents perhaps 1/10 of what humanity has prepared. We have ships you have not seen. We have weapons you cannot comprehend. And we carry 300 years of carefully controlled anger that we have kept locked away. She looked directly at the Archon with an unwavering gaze. Do not force us to release it. The vote that followed was unanimous. All 12 species accepted every one of humanity's conditions without requesting any modifications. They had seen human mercy demonstrated in action. None of them wished to experience human wrath. In the weeks and months that followed the vote, everything about galactic civilization began to change. HFY vessels started the long process of returning human captives. Some of these people had been held in slavery for decades. The reunions with their families were filled with tears of joy and sorrow. Alina Vasquez attended as many of these emotional gatherings as her schedule permitted, offering comfort to families who were finally becoming whole again. Thetian research stations released their prisoners. Medical ships staffed entirely by human doctors arrived to provide treatment for survivors who had been damaged by years of cruel experimentation. Recovery was slow and difficult, but humanity demonstrated the same patience in healing that it had shown in preparing for war. Human colonists returned to the worlds that had been stolen from them. They planted new crops in familiar soil. They rebuilt homes that had been destroyed. They started the long journey of transforming occupied territories back into thriving, free communities. And in the Galactic Conquered Assembly, humanity finally claimed its rightful place among the stars. Ambassador Alina Vasquez cast the first human vote in conquered history. Appropriately, it was a vote supporting increased protections for developing species, ensuring that no young civilization would ever endure what humanity had endured. Captain Marcus Chen attended the memorial service honoring the victims of the New Haven massacre. 3,000 children and 9,000 adults were remembered by name in a ceremony that lasted for 3 full days. Representatives from every conquered species traveled to pay their respects and acknowledge their collective shame. I never truly believed this day would come, Marcus confessed to Alina after the ceremony concluded. I never imagined they would actually accept responsibility for what they did. They had no alternative, Alina replied thoughtfully. We removed every other option, but I hope that as time passes, their acceptance will become genuine understanding. I hope they will eventually learn to see us as equals not because we forced them to, but because recognizing our equality is simply right. Do you honestly believe that kind of change is possible? Alina smiled, and for the first time in many decades, it was a completely authentic smile. I have to believe it is possible. Hope is what sustained me through 30 years of humiliation and abuse. Hope is what kept humanity building in secret when surrender would have been easier. Hope is what inspired us to develop weapons that disable instead of destroy. We demonstrated mercy to the galaxy, even when the galaxy had never shown any mercy to us. She looked up at the stars visible through the memorial's transparent ceiling. If humanity can accomplish that, then anything is possible, even teaching ancient species to adopt new ways of thinking. Years flowed into decades. Decades accumulated into centuries. Humanity became a true partner in galactic civilization. Human scientists collaborated with Thetian researchers, and together they achieved discoveries that benefited every species. Human merchants traded freely with HFY worlds, creating prosperity in places where only exploitation had existed before. Human diplomats helped resolve conflicts between species, applying the patience humanity had developed through 300 years of suffering. And whenever a new species was discovered, whenever a young civilization achieved first contact with the conquered, they were welcomed with genuine respect. No one wanted to repeat the catastrophic mistakes of the past. No one wanted to create another enemy like humanity had been forced to become. These new species always asked the same curious question. Why did the elder races treat newcomers with such unusual consideration? Why did they work so diligently to ensure that developing civilizations were protected from harm? The answer was always the same. It was recorded in the history books of 12 different civilizations. It was taught in schools across 10,000 worlds. It was passed from one generation to the next as both a warning and a lesson. Because no race ever forgot the day humanity's patience ran out. They remembered the quiet species that had smiled politely and filed paperwork for 300 years. They remembered the shocked silence that fell over the assembly hall when Ambassador Vasquez rose from her observer's chair. They remembered the terror of watching human vessels materialize from hiding places no one had thought to search. And above all else, they remembered the mercy. Humanity could have destroyed them utterly. Humanity could have taken bloody revenge for centuries of abuse and murder. Instead, humanity had shown restraint. They had demanded justice rather than blood. They had built weapons specifically designed to disable rather than kill. That mercy was perhaps the most frightening revelation of all. It proved that humanity had maintained complete control over the situation from the very beginning. Every polite smile, every ignored grievance, every moment of apparent weakness had been a conscious, deliberate choice. Humanity had chosen to be patient, and then humanity had chosen to stop being patient. The elder races never forgot that profound lesson. They never forgot that quiet species might be thinking dangerous thoughts. They never forgot that patience and weakness were not the same thing. And they never, ever forgot what waited beyond that patience. Because some lessons, once truly learned, remain learned forever. Elena Vasquez lived long enough to witness the completion of everything she had worked to achieve. She died peacefully at 112 years of age, surrounded by family and honored by every civilization in the galaxy. Her final words were carefully recorded and preserved for future generations. "Teach them to be patient," she whispered with her last breath. "Teach them to hope, but also teach them to be ready, because no one can predict when patience will no longer be sufficient, and when that day arrives, humanity must be strong enough to do what must be done." She smiled one final time. "We were strong enough, make certain we always will be." And so this story concludes, not with destruction but with hope, not with revenge but with justice, not with silence but with a voice the entire galaxy had finally learned to respect. No race ever forgot the day humanity's patience ran out. And no race ever wanted to discover what existed beyond it.